All right. Well, we have a special guest today with us who reached out to me proactively back in October when it was National Pharmacist Month, and I dropped the ball because I had so many other things going on. But I wanted to circle back with this professional because she has a really interesting career path and one that I get asked about all the time. Her name is Dr. Erin Zagadailov, and she is Director of Health Economics and Outcomes Research for Rare Disease with a small commercial stage biotech company. So, with that, I am excited to have her join us today and talk about HEOR. I know it's an area that I get a lot of questions in, and I want to pick her brain about her passion for honeybees. So, Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to state up front that all the opinions and views I present today are my own and not of my employer. And I'm excited to be here today. I'm not really selling anything or promoting anything. I try to think of myself as a true advocate for non-traditional pharmacy careers, and in particular, the field of HEOR and market access. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about that today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm so glad that you reached out. Again, HEOR is an area that I get asked about, or HECON. I don't know which acronym you're supposed to use, but I always inevitably like to start with the first same question of all my guests when we talk about career discussions. So, Erin, how did you get to where you are today in your own career?
It's a great question. And when you sent me this question ahead of time, I realized that the answer I was drafting or formulating was more about the what did I do to get here, not the how. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both, if that's okay.
Mhm.
I think the how really drills down to three main things for me: mentors guiding me along the way, advocating for myself, and employing a fierce sense of focus in terms of what I want to achieve and what I want to spend my time on. I think that's the how. But talking about the what, I think, is important too. I initially, as a high school student, believe it or not, approached the pharmacist at the local Eckerd near my house and told him that I thought about pharmacy as a career and I wanted to get some exposure to it before I spent, 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars and changed majors. So as a 16-year-old, I might be dating myself a little bit here, but this was before they changed the law that you had to be 18 to work in a pharmacy. But as a 16-year-old, I started working for Eckerd and eventually went on to pharmacy school at Duquesne University. And when I was at Duquesne University, there was a management concentration that was available to students, and I decided to take that management concentration. I was working for Eckerd, which turned into Rite Aid all throughout all throughout pharmacy school and all throughout college. And I sort of looked at that management track as a way to advance myself within the retail industry. Part of that management elective or management track included an elective course in pharmacoeconomics taught by Professor Khalid Kamal. And it really opened my eyes to a number of possibilities and potential career paths, and kind of linking it back to the how. And that first thing I mentioned was mentors guiding me along the way. He was definitely key in one of those, but he approached me and sort of told me that I had a knack for this and I could really make a nice career out of it. And with his guidance, I decided to do an API with a strategic consulting services group called Exenda, and they're a part of AmerisourceBergen. So I did an advanced practice elective rotation with Exenda, and that exposed me to a number of things on the strategic consulting side, and they do a lot of different types of strategic consulting for pharmaceutical manufacturers, so exposed me to a number of things during that API. But I eventually decided to apply for their HEOR fellowship and a number of other HEOR fellowships. I primarily focused on fellowships that provided a master's degree as part of the fellowship. It was important to me to focus on degree granting fellowships because I felt like that additional degree was something that could be of value to me long term as opposed to a certificate program. So I eventually landed at Exenda where I did that API. And I stayed on post fellowship with them for a few years until I was eventually hired by a client who had asked me to join him at Takeda Oncology, which gave me a foot in the door on the industry side. So making that jump from consulting to industry really had to leverage my network and mentors there to do that as well. I spent some time at Takeda for 4 years in two different roles, really. Initially in research and development as part of the global outcomes research team in a true evidence generation role, focusing on patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials, real-world evidence projects, and other types of observational studies. But what I was really missing in that role was the business side and my roots and my interest in health economics. So I ultimately made an internal transfer to Takeda's global market access team, where I spent 2 years there, focused more in a commercially oriented role on value demonstration, patient access, pricing, and of course, health economics. I spent 4 years there at Takeda Oncology and kind of felt like I needed a new challenge, which is why I changed jobs about 6 months ago, and it led me to the role that I'm in right now.
Awesome. So let's talk about your current role.
So I joined Agios about 6 months ago as Director of Health Economics and Outcomes Research in Rare Genetic Disease. I am leading all of our HEOR efforts for rare genetic disease. And I initially spent a lot of my, albeit short careers thus far, in oncology. And at the time, I felt like I was ready to make a change or a move in my career. I sort of fundamentally had to ask myself, well, why am I making a change? And primarily that was because I wanted a challenge. And at the time, I had a number of offers presented to me, some that were also in oncology. And I decided ultimately to join Agios because rare genetic disease was something new for me and I wanted a challenge. And I certainly got what I asked for.
So, Erin, it sounds like you had the luck of a fellowship opportunity combined with a master's program to really serve you well in educating you around HECON and HEOR. What about maybe a pharmacy student who doesn't have that opportunity? What suggestions do you have for him or her around getting educated and learning more about HECON and or HEOR? Is it a rotation, or what are your suggestions there?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. Being active in ISPOR, which is an organization that I've been active in since I was a pharmacy student. I know most pharmacy schools, maybe not all of them, have student chapters. ISPOR, in my opinion at least, is sort of the thought leader organization around all things health economics, outcomes research, and market access. They have a number of opportunities to learn through their organization, short courses, and I also think that rotations are very few and far between and tend to be concentrated geographically in certain areas, which I think puts some schools at a disadvantage. You see a lot of those rotations kind of in the New Jersey or Boston area, maybe some in San Francisco, where a lot of the geographically pharmaceutical companies are located, maybe in Indiana with Lilly, but I think it's hard for students who aren't close to those areas to get access to APPEs that expose them to industry unless they're willing to shell out money and travel and pay for housing and that kind of thing. And sometimes logistics can get in the way. But I think in a lot of ways, advocating for yourself and networking is really key. You'd be surprised, I think, what people are willing to open themselves to in terms of shadowing experiences, or even just getting on the phone with them to talk about their experience and kind of what it takes to get into those types of roles. That would kind of be my recommendation. I think in a lot of ways, I was listening to a podcast a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, really, that the Black Keys were on, a rock band, indie band. I'm not sure if you're familiar, Erin, but the interview had asked the Black Keys kind of, how does an indie band make it in today's music industry? And their response was something to the effect of, there is no one path. You kind of have to forge your own. And that the music industry was so dynamic and changing with streaming and everything and technology, and that there was no one way to make it. And I think there's a lot of parallels to that in pharmacy right now too. That there's really no one way. I mean, fellowships are a great tool. They're kind of, I think, the most common path to HEOR, but it's certainly not the only way. And I think if there's a specific type of role or job that a student desires, that they really should be getting in front of those people who are in those roles currently and ask them what it takes, or ask them who's hiring, and ask those types of questions of the people who are in the roles that you are trying to seek out.
By the way, ISPOR is the Professional Society for Health Economics and Outcomes Research. I know we love our acronyms in this industry, so I just wanted to break that down for the audience. Erin, what do you love about health economics and outcomes research?
What I love about HEOR is that there's so much opportunity for collaboration, and it is also very highly strategic. I think in some ways, a lot of pharmaceutical companies or manufacturers sort of view HEOR as a support function as opposed to a lead function like marketing or medical affairs. I think some companies are better than others in seeing the value of HEOR professionals. But my 2 cents is that HEOR is often the bridge between the science, the discovery, and the business and the patient access side. In a lot of ways, HEOR professionals kind of help bridge that divide and are supposed to be, or should be really, the experts on the evidence that is required to bring these products to market. The other thing that I really love about my job is that I get exposure to healthcare markets outside of the US, and that I get to observe how other countries approach decision making, how they decide to allocate healthcare resources. Most of the major markets outside the US are under the umbrella of some sort of a national healthcare system. And a lot of times when we're making those submissions for reimbursement, we're going to the government authority. And it's interesting to me sort of what types of evidence that other markets will allow and consider, and what types of evidence sort of move the needle in terms of getting them from a no to a yes. That is sort of a very interesting thing to me, and I really love that part about my job.
Let me divert a little bit and ask you a question with your opinion only, of course, with the caveat and disclaimer up front. Who do you think is doing healthcare right? Because our healthcare now is almost consuming 18% of our GDP in this country. So who is doing it right?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I think there's no one system that works the best or perfectly. I tend to sort of lean towards if I could make some sort of hybrid, I guess, between how Germany and the UK approach healthcare. Germany is often kind of regarded as sort of a clinical effectiveness market. A lot of their decision is driven by the clinical evidence. But they also have this semi-free market approach where they do allow free pricing for the first year before you have to come and negotiate. So it does have, like the US, a little bit of a free market aspect, at least for a short term, before negotiations are required statutorily. The UK, I think, more than other markets, and is sort of regarded as the classical cost effectiveness market, where they consider more health economic information and quality of life information than I think some other markets do. And there's other markets like that too, but I guess that would be maybe some sort of quasi hybrid of the two, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't looked at other global healthcare systems now for quite some time, but there's got to be better models out there. So with that, I guess, is my second part to the question, what challenges do you face in your role?
I'd say specific to kind of the role that I'm doing right now, working in rare genetic disease or really any rare disease and being responsible for generating evidence in a rare disease, really the challenge, quite simply, because of the epidemiology, can be finding patients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Feeling like you have to uncover every possible stone to find them and get a sample that is robust enough to do research that is meaningful or can sort of generate the evidence that we need. I think in the rare genetic disease space, that continues to be a challenge, and that's not specific to my role now or um, any of the work I'm doing specifically, but I think anybody working in the rare space could resonate with that. I also think, and this applies to, I think, not necessarily HEOR, but a lot of types of roles, but speed and agility, whether it's speed to market or speed to publish or speed to finish enrollment. There's often sort of a challenge in terms of how you balance speed, agility, and doing that without trying to compromise quality when achieving it. Um, and then I think personally, and this is not really specific to my role or HEOR, but one of the things that I grapple with personally is with respect to my pharmacy license. And I've been, I passed the NAPLEX in 2010, so I'm coming up on 10 years, and I've never really been in a true practice or dispensing role. And I sort of think to myself, should I keep renewing my license? Should I hang on to it? Or is it time to let it go? And that's something that I sort of grapple with personally, and haven't really made a decision yet, but I'll have to renew in September 2020 if I decide to keep my license. But that's, I guess, more of a personal challenge in terms of my career.
That's really interesting. That's the first time I've heard that as a personal challenge in the non-traditional healthcare role in space, but it's something I pondered too, because I have to maintain 3 licenses myself right now, and it's a lot of work to do that. So, Erin, let's talk a little bit about your office setting. Do you work remotely? Do you work at a home office? How does that work? And how do you manage, the basics of your day? Like, take us through a typical day for Erin.
Yeah, it's a very unique thing for me. I live in rural New Hampshire. And interestingly, about I think 9 out of 10 jobs in biotech right now are concentrated in the greater Boston area or the Silicon Valley, San Francisco area. The beauty of the company that I work for right now is that they really subscribe to flexible work arrangements, and that allows me to work from home when I need to, but I also have an office and spend days in the office quite regularly. My home is about 100 miles or so from the office. So I think that classifies me as what would be deemed a super commuter. And so I do work from home a good deal, but I also super commute into Boston 1, sometimes 2 days a week. It waxes and wanes, but a typical day at home for me is very different from a typical day in the office for me. I tend to try to load most of the required face-to-face meetings for my days in the office. So my days in the office are kind of spent bouncing from conference room to conference room and meeting with various different teams and people. And my days at home, I really try to do a lot of my deep thinking, deep work, and things that require hours to look at documents or to review things or to review studies and that kind of thing. So I like that no one day is is the same. It's not monotonous at all. It doesn't really feel like a hamster wheel grind, if you will. Every day is completely different, and I sort of like that variety. But it is definitely a challenge, I think, living far from the office. But I've grown accustomed to it, I guess. I kind of had the same arrangement when I worked at Takeda as well. So living in rural New Hampshire and working in Boston for a pharmaceutical company is certainly an interesting balance in terms of, quality of life at home and excelling in my career as well.
So I know we talked a little bit about students and your best advice for them, but what about maybe the mid-career pharmacist? Maybe they've been in an institutional setting or retail setting, and they're more interested in, looking more at health economics and outcomes research, but maybe they don't have the luxury of going back to earn a fellowship. So I know you mentioned ICE4. What other resources would you recommend to those kind of mid-career professionals that are maybe looking for something non-traditional?
Yeah, again, I go back to network, network, network. I think there's a lot of contract opportunities out there that might be an opportunity for a foot in the door. I see, at least in my inbox on LinkedIn, opportunities for contract HEOR work or contract medical writing, and a lot of the HEOR roles do really sort of focus on the right experience and the specific skill sets. And I think it's difficult for particularly a retail or community pharmacist to pivot into that without the right experience. I hate to say it, but they just don't get it.
Mm.
And but I do think that there are skill sets that are transferable when you look at like a pathway of evidence synthesis, for example. I would expect any pharmacist to be able to read and dissect a journal article appropriately, whether or not they worked in Walgreens for 10 years or did something else for a long time. I think those types of core skill sets are quite transferable. Being able to read studies, synthesize evidence, connect the dots. I also think that there are a number of organizations out there, not just ISPOR, but that are opening doors for women in bio. And that is one of the organizations that I'm a part of, as well as Women in Bio. And they sort of have a number of mentoring opportunities for women in life sciences or biotech. And I think that organization has particularly a way of sort of exposing women in life science to other types of careers in life science as well. Mass Bio is another one that's kind of specific to the Boston area, but I think you really have to, again, network, 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 and get out there and talk to the people who are in the jobs that you desire, and ask them, again, kind of, what does it take, and ask around about in terms of who's hiring. There's so much opportunity in the HEOR market access space right now. The talent market really is kind of insane, and it's incredibly difficult to find good HEOR and market access candidates with the right mix of experience and skill sets. There's so much opportunity, to the point where, one can be quite selective, as I was just 6 months ago, with multiple offers in my hands and trying to decide which move I wanted to make next. I think within HEOR too, there's so many avenues that one can subspecialize in, whether it's real world evidence, clinical outcomes assessments, patient reported outcomes, or health economics, evidence synthesis. There's so many different types of expertise and types of projects that one could really focus on if they wanted to.
Yeah, I know a couple years ago, I went to the Harvard School of Public Health and took an executive program for about a week on health economics and outcomes research. And I noticed there were a lot of field-based medical science liaisons and or practitioners there who were trying to learn more about that space. So are there any other certificates, certifications, any other kind of, like, not just a one and done CE program out there that you've seen that does a really good job in kind of covering the basics of health economics and outcomes research?
Yeah, not really that I know of. No, I mean, ISPOR, International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research, they offer a number of short courses, but again, those are kind of those one and done sort of things. There are a number of online master's programs. I know Thomas Jefferson offers one in applied health economics and outcomes research, Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, the University of Florida, which is my alma mater and where I obtained my master's in applied pharmacoeconomics. And a lot of these programs are online, and they're meant to be paced for working professionals. And I think that's perhaps one way to get some relevant experience and to pivot back in. I know a lot of mid-career professionals might not have the luxury of taking on a pay cut or taking on another degree, or the sort of time commitment that goes along with that. But there are tools out there for working professionals, that might be one way to do it.
Cool. So let's put away the shop talk here and talk for a second about our own nerdy little passion around honeybees. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that? When you filled out the form to be part of the podcast, you talked about honeybees, and I kind of perked up when I read about that. So explain to our audience what your passion is around honeybees.
Well, Erin, this is a topic I am passionate about, and it started as sort of a maybe an experiment. I won't even say a side hustle, really, that my husband and I spent some time and investment into to start keeping honeybees, and we're about 3 years in, and it's quite frankly the most humbling, I think, experience I've ever had, and sort of coming to terms with epic failure in a lot of ways. But it's beekeeping is not for the faint at heart. It is very difficult, and there's so many challenges that go along with that. Um, where we are right now is, especially in New Hampshire, where we have a very northern cold climate. It's beekeeping here is completely different than it is even, say, in Virginia, which is not that much far different. It completely different than, beekeeping in Louisiana too. It's just a whole different beast up here. But trying to get a beehive to survive the winter, number one, and which we have not been able to do yet after 3 years. But I know people are eager to buy honey from us and really cheering us on. And here we are, sort of being faced with new challenges every year on the beekeeping front. And it's certainly been an interesting ride. One of the challenges we had 2 seasons ago was a black bear who came in and
Oh,
annihilated all of our beehives.
oh no.
And we had an electric fence, and you don't expect these things. And last season we had our first swarm, which was an interesting thing to experience live. It was sort of happening right in front of me as I was suiting up to go out and inspect the beehive. They started to swarm, and we tried to collect the swarm, but it took off before we were able to do so. But anyways, it's been very humbling, and we still enjoy doing it very much so, and kind of hope to continue doing so. And maybe we'll have some success eventually, but it's certainly been an interesting and humbling hobby.
And what's the why behind it, Erin? Is it the sustainability piece? Is it the environment? Like, what's the hook for you and your husband to be involved in this? Because it clearly sounds like it's a passion project.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. Hashtag save the bees, hashtag bring back the bees. But we know that honeybees are experiencing a number of issues. And I think I saw some article in NPR or that said something to the effect of about, I think, 40% or maybe up to 60% of all beehives in New Hampshire didn't make it through the winter last year. And so the survivability is very low. And, we're trying to get better at it, and we're trying to learn from beekeepers who are more experienced and more established. And one of the biggest challenges is sourcing bees to start our season. Because we have not been able to get a beehive through the winter, we essentially have to kind of start over every year. And that starting over means we have to source bees from somewhere. And I'm trying to also, through networking and reaching out to some other beekeepers that I know locally here, try to find other sources for honeybees so we can find some bees, maybe perhaps with better northern genetics.
Wow. So, yeah, I could talk all day about the honeybees because it's fascinating to me. But in closing, Erin, any kind of general advice overall for non-traditional healthcare professionals? I know we were talking before we recorded about the fact that I think there's still a tremendous opportunity for most pharmacy schools to expose students to a variety of career paths, of which one is health economics and outcomes research. Anything else you'd like to add to that before we close it up?
Yeah, I will say that what I'm experiencing or what I'm observing and seeing in health economics and outcomes research is kind of quite a juxtaposition to what's going on in traditional pharmacy careers, where there is really limited or no job opportunities for new grads and for new professionals. And that's quite the opposite in HEOR. There's so many job opportunities and so many positions that need to be filled. I think in a lot of ways, pharmacy schools, if they're not exposing students to non-traditional career paths, are doing a large disservice to their students. And I think pharmacy schools really should be trying to expose pharmacy students to non-traditional career paths, whether it's health economics outcomes research or market access, or there's a number of opportunities, not just within HEOR and market access, whether it's pharmacovigilance or clinical trials, or there's so much opportunity right now in the machine learning space and artificial intelligence and digital trials, wearables, all kinds of things. It's a very dynamic space right now, and there's opportunity abounds. And I think that pharmacy schools really should be exposing students to other types of career paths that don't involve standing in a community pharmacy for 14 hours a day or doing a residency.
Could not agree more. So in closing, Erin, where can people connect with you?
I think the best way to connect with me professionally is on LinkedIn. And I think in terms of face-to-face or in real life, ISPOR is probably the best place. I think almost every year, except for the 1 year I was on maternity leave, I have attended the ISPOR annual meeting. So that is sort of the hotspot for HEOR professionals to congregate every year, and mostly find myself there almost every year. But yeah, those are probably the best two places to connect with me.
Well, with that, Erin Zagadailov, thank you for being part of the podcast as Director of Health Economics and Outcomes Research for Rare Diseases. I know I've been asked a lot about this arena, and now I feel like I learned a little bit more about that as well as beekeeping today. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, Erin. It's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to talk more about bees or HEOR anytime.
Thanks, Erin.